Welcome to our Winter Outlooks webinar. Here is the program for today.
If you can write down your questions as we go along through the slides, that would be helpful, so we have time to really provide great answers to you. We will pause at the end of the presentations and allow you to give a few more questions before we conclude the webinar. As I was saying, as you can see from the slide, our objective is really to emphasize the role of interconnections, to emphasize the influence of external factors on the gas and the electricity system, and to also go to test the sensitivity of the power system, looking at very extreme case scenarios, and also to look back on what happened in the previous season so we can take some lessons on board. So without further ado, we can move to the presentation on the winter outlook of ENTSO-E. So I will ask my colleague Alban Joyaux, Senior System Development Advisor at ENTSO-E, to get you through the slides.
Yes, thank you, Claire. Good morning. So I'm Alban Joyaux, ENTSO-E in charge of adequacy. So I will present you the electricity winter outlook. So first, to take the background, there are different horizon times on different products for these different times. So if we start with the very long term, so more than 10 years, 10 to 20 years, there is a 10 years network development plan, TYNDP, which is mainly proposed for infrastructure needs and long-term needs. Then you have the midterm adequacy forecast, MAF, looking for 5 to 10 years ahead. And this one addressed the needs for adequacy, especially possibly investment in generations that are still possible within 5 to 10 years. And at the shorter term, you have the seasonal outlook, looking 6 months ahead for next winter or next summer. That are the most, I would say, critical seasons, because either of low temperature or high temperature. And you have the week ahead, which is performed by the regional security coordinators. So every week to assess the adequacy of the coming 7 days. So if we go to the next slide, so we'll focus on the seasonal outlook. So the seasonal outlook is a stepwise approach based on the expertise of the TSOs. From our 43 TSOs, and we use also a consistent approach based on pan-European databases. We have different pan-European databases for climate historical data related to the wind, the temperature, the photovoltaic radiation in hourly basis, 34 years historical values. We have also a database about low temperature link, because the temperature has an influence on the load increase or decrease, especially in the winter, but also in the summer with the cooling. And it depends on the country, this influence. So we have an overview of this influence. We have also an overview dataset of the force outage rate by generation 5 that can be adjusted by TSOs when there is specificities. And we take also input data from the transparency platform. So the TSOs are the expert to check the data on from a national point of view, especially regarding demand, regarding generation and maintenance of generators, and transfer capacities, net transfer capacities. And this is done at a weekly basis. So if we go to the, keeping on this slide, the next block is the European constraint scenario that we built based on these inputs. We keep on the same slide, so the second block. So we are focusing at a weekly resolution on two aspects that are different for the system. The one is the peak, the synchronous peak in Europe. So we take a deterministic approach, and it was assessed that in a pan-European view, the synchronous peak is at 7 p.m. in a typical weekday. That is taken Wednesday as middle of the week, typical weekday. It is the peak upward adequacy situation that we will go through in the next slides. And you have also the downward regulation. That is the opposite way. So it's when there is a very low demand and a very high renewable in feed, especially wind. So it's generally a Sunday, typically Sunday 5 a.m. Early morning, you have no sun, and you have not so much sun or no sun in winter, and you have a high wind but very, very low demand. And the Sunday at 11, because here you can have quite high important sun but still quite low demand. So these are two point in time that are different, that are assessed in the report. And the last steps is to, based on this weekly deterministic approach, they allow us to flag on a focused analysis on the weeks that are potentially at risk. And we'll see this example in the next slide. So we use that probabilistic approach using this pan-European climate database I mentioned, with temperature, wind, photovoltaic in particular. And the goal is to estimate the probability to give an order of magnitude, because it's quite challenging to estimate probability of a possible issue, a possible critical situation, and to try to identify the main drivers of this possible risky situation. Also, starting before giving the results of the outlook, the assumptions change in terms of net generation capacity confirm the trend that we have seen in the previous years. Mainly, so there is a decrease of mainly thermal and an increase of mainly wind and solar. And this year you have, to say it in simplified way, you have the same amount of decrease generation, which is controllable. So you can modify it and plan it, control it, which is replaced by the same amount of around 14 gigawatt of variable generation, wind and solar. So we see that the stress on the system is increasing, because you replace generation that can run almost all the time when on request, by generation that will produce energy only when there is wind or photovoltaic available. Also interesting to notice, but just as information, that there was in the previous year a light decrease of gas compared to the year before, where there was an increase, but in the average of the 2 years there is a light increase of gas overall power plants in Europe. So I propose to go to the next slides for the concrete results of the deterministic approach. So as I explained in the slide before about the stepwise approach, there are different steps. First deterministic, and then we focus on the situation at risk with a probabilistic analysis. So this year we took voluntary more severe assumptions especially on demand and renewable energy, wind essentially, because no sun at that time. But you have demand that are one in equivalent of 20 years, and you have also a lowest wind in 20 years at that period, that are taken from different inputs from the TSO expertise on climate database. And based on that, we know that we have a kind of stress test, which is might be pessimistic, because we take a synchronous severe conditions in neighboring countries. So saying that both in Central Europe, North Europe, Southern Europe, you have at the same time lack of wind and very high load. So stressing situation. Also, we really, it's important to mention, we excluded any non-market capacity like strategic reserve from this calculation, also from the probabilistic approach coming in the next phase, in order to see what is the situation without any specific strategic reserves. So what we see here regarding the table, we'll not go into the details, but we want to picture the country by countries, different colors. If it's green, a weekly basis at a weekly peak, and a typical peak at 7 p.m., a typical Wednesday. So depending on the color, there is either capacity excess, so the country can export, sorry, or there is a need of import for adequacy when it's dark blue. And when it's light blue, we made a simplified merit order approach, but it's not a full market analysis. It's only a simplified approach to give an order of magnitude of possible countries that might need to import, not for adequacy, but by merit order. So then, focusing on the countries that are depicted in dark blue, we have for some of them partial orange in week 2 and 3 that are the situation where there is a risk of deficit of capacity even after import. So here we will go through on the next slide, but before that I just wanted to mention that there is an area, especially and you see on the map on the right, that the southern and southern west countries can export, and the continental mainly, and also Great Britain, import maximal, and the capacity of the interconnection depicted in red are saturated at this example case, so that the situation of scarcity risk is existing in this area, especially France, Great Britain and Belgium, and it could the situation could be depicted in different possible situations depending on the sharing, I would say, of the scarcity in this area. Regarding one country, Finland, that is quite orange here, it's very important to consider there is no import from Russia considered in the world report, what is a very conservative assumptions. So we know that Finland relies on Russia, but we assess this as a stress test. So it's just to consider as a stress test here. Maybe you can go to the next slide. So on the probabilistic assessment, we focused on the week 2. So as we saw on the previous slide, there were week 3 was also critical, but a bit less extent. And the situation depicted in week 2 is also the vigilance. I would say there is a need of vigilance in week 2 and 3 in particular in case of a cold wave, a severe cold wave in Europe. And there are several countries to be especially observed. Belgium, France, Italy, possibly Poland and Great Britain as well. Because some of them, so here you have a sample of scatter plots. The graph is quite not easy to read. It's not the purpose to see the details. I will invite you to have a look at the report for more details here. But just the purpose is to see that when it's green, there is absolute no need for importing. When it's blue, there is a need for import for adequacy, and when it's red, there is a risk of scarcity. So we see there that there are on the left example chart for Belgium. There is a risk when the temperature is very low and the wind also is very limited. There is also for France the situation that is more related to temperature only because of the France sensitivity to temperature, which is the highest in Europe in the winter time. So, and for Italy, you have also a similar effect, I would say, of dependence to the temperature. And on the right, you have a scatter plot with an example of Poland. And here you see there is no direct dependence of the temperature and the wind. So the situation of scarcity in these countries, Poland, Great Britain, are possibly linked more to a scarcity in neighboring countries that can spread also through lack of, or I would say lack of surplus of generation in neighboring exporting countries. There was two countries, Finland and Lithuania, with asterisks once again. We have assumed the same conservative way to assume no import possible from Russia and from Belarus, so that we see some possible risk in that stress test. Okay, so also before going to the conclusion, this is the same approach without any non-market capacity, without any strategic reserve, and we want to show the risk here that is assessed on a typical peak at 7 p.m. on weekly basis. You have also possible national or country peaks timed on that are different time than 7 p.m. but 7 p.m. is the average for the highest peak for all Europe together. And so it's important to consider that. In the future, we want to improve further the seasonal outlook and to go a bit more assessing the needs for hourly calculation, for instance, and not only 7 p.m. but try to assess much more samples of possible hours during the winter in order to get a more precise view. So it's a continuous improvement.
So thank you very much, Alban. We will now move to ENTSO winter supply outlook with Arturo de Onis. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Claire. This is Arturo Onis speaking. I'm a system development advisor for ENTSO. and I will start my talk with winter review, as it is very important to define many of the assumptions that are later on used in the outlooks. So, as many people might already know, last winter was marked by a extreme cold event in January. The seasonal gas demand was 12% higher, and the day consumption, peak day consumption increased by 5% compared to the previous winter. The situation was especially tense in the Southeast Europe, as you can see in the graph for Bulgaria, Romania, and Greece. The cold spell has led some of these countries to revise the peak demand for the winter supply outlook. On the right side of the slide, you can see the natural gas for power generation reached 20%, and this is the highest level in 7 years in the EU-wide perspective. And to finalize with this slide, I would like to remark that this year the winter review has been published separately from the winter outlook report, and includes further analysis of this extreme cold event happened during January 2017. Regarding the winter outlook, in the next slide. So for people to understand the concept, here we have an introduction of the assumptions. So in the assessment, we look at the reference winter and cold winter. For the reference winter, the average demand is collected from our members in a data collection process, as well as for the national production. The model targets a 30% inventory level in the storages, and we allow the model with a supply flexibility as observed during the last 5 years. On the cold winter case, we look at the highest demand since 2009-2010 winter, which was defined for the SOS, the union-wide SOS simulation, with what has been done this year, 2017, for the first time in parallel of the winter supply outlook. We also lived higher LNG flexibility that has been observed since 2009-10 levels. Finally, we also look on top of this to the high demand cases that are the peak day and the 2-week cold spell. For the first time this year, it's also important to remember that L-gas zones have been modeled. About the initial supply situation in the start of the winter, it is important to say that the inventory level of the storages was very low, 84%. You can see the country granularity in the right side of the slide in the map. It is also important to remember that the UK RAF storage announced its closure, so it has not been considered in the assessment, and that the production in the EU is declining mainly because of the Groningen in the Netherlands. So without delay, we look at the next slide with the results. For the average winter, the 30% UGS target is fully achievable, and the cold winter results vary from 50% down to 12% depending on the injection at the beginning of the winter season. Fortunately, this has happened during October, and the storage levels went up to almost 90% at the end of this month. It's for the cold winter situation. Of course, LNG would and storages would need to be higher used. And when looking at when looking at the high demand situations, 2-week cold spell and the sine case, the results showed some low remaining flexibility in Finland and Sweden, which is consistent with the results from previous outlooks. And cold winter design case also showed a potential bottleneck from Serbia to Bosnia, as well as low remaining flexibility in some countries like Greece, Croatia, UK, and the low gas zone of Germany. Apart from these results that come out of extreme high demand events, the European gas infrastructure shows sufficient flexibility and can supply neighboring countries with significant volumes of gas. Anyway, security of supply remains a point of attention, and with this I give the floor to my colleague Louis, so he can explain a little bit more about the security of supply report.
Thank you, Arturo. So as Arturo just said, and as you may have noticed, no disruption simulation was included in ENTSO Winter Outlook this year. This is because the simulation of the gas supply and infrastructure disruptions is now a regulatory exercise since this year, and it is defined by the new security of gas supply regulation that entered into force 1st of November. This new exercise was defined with the Gas Coordination Group, and ENTSO published the first ever union-wide security of supply simulation report on November the 21st this year. In this report, we consider now 17 disruption scenarios that we assess along the main gas supply emergency corridors. If we go quickly to the next slide, please. Just to precise that compared to the disruption simulation we made last year for Ukraine, for instance, if you look at the previous winter outlook of ENTSO, the assessment of the disruptions now are slightly different, because the first thing is that we now consider longer duration of the different disruptions, from 2 weeks for onshore infrastructure disruptions to 2 months for the offshore and non-technical disruptions. And a second important assumption is that we still consider a high demand over the winter based on historical demand, as Arturo just explained a bit earlier. But for the 2-week cold spell and the peak day, we now are considering probabilistic demand that can occur once every 20 years, which gives more challenging figures to assess the impact of the different disruptions. Another important assumption we consider is the level of the gas in the storages at the beginning of the winter for these disruption simulations. So this year we were at 84% on 1st of October, as Arturo said. When we made the simulation, we based the storage level on historical lowest level, which was 82%, not that far than the storage level this year, but still below. And again, this gives more challenging assumptions to the security of supply simulations. So, because this year it was not in the report, but you may are still interested in the Ukrainian wood disruption scenario. This year, and ENTSO-E in its winter outlook is also considering this this scenario this year. So this year the Ukrainian disruption, as I told you, is one of the 17 scenarios we consider in the SOS report, and as it is still a situation, and so we assess in this report. Let's have a quick look at it. So this year the Ukrainian road disruption is assessed for 2 months duration in January and February. For the simulation, the report focuses on some groups of countries and not directly the entire EU. That's maybe why you see on your screen only part of Europe, but I will give you the figures for the whole Europe. The map on the left side that you see is the situation for the winter with a 2-month disruption. You can see that the situation is quite tense for Bulgaria, that can face around 70% of demand curtailment in case of Ukrainian disruption for 2 months. This is due to infrastructure bottlenecks with the other countries, and to a lesser extent Romania and Greece are exposed to demand curtailment of 9 and below 2% for Greece, only in February. The map in the middle of the slide shows the situation for a 2-week exceptionally high demand event like a cold spell simulated in February and during the disruption. In this case, the situation remains similar for Bulgaria, but Romania is exposed to more demand curtailment, around 25%. The map, you can see 2 maps. The map on the top shows the situation if we maintain all the exports to Ukraine, and the map at the bottom shows the situation if we were to reduce the exports by 25% to Ukraine. So in the map on the top you could see that the rest of Europe would be short of gas by roughly 100 gigawatt hour per day. This is roughly around 0.5% of the European demand. So this is rather limited impact. And if we were to reduce the exports to Ukraine by 25%, then the situation would be completely mitigated. Just one short technical explanation. The percentages you see on the map are for the group of countries that are colored in yellow. So when I say that 100 gigawatt hour per day is around 0.5% of European demand, it's more close to 1% if you look only at those countries in yellow. And finally, on the right side of the slide, you can see the situation for a peak day in 20 years. In this case, Bulgaria and Romania are still impacted, maybe a bit more, and Greece would be exposed to higher ratio of demand curtailment, around 17%. For the rest of Europe, if exports to Ukraine were maintained entirely, it would represent a gas shortage of 1 terawatt hour, roughly. This is about 3% of the European demand. And if we were to completely interrupt the exports to Ukraine, this gas shortage would be possibly of 500 gigawatt hours, which would represent 1.5% of the European demand. If you want to get more insight on the Ukrainian disruption, or if you are also interested by the 16 other scenarios that we simulated, the ENTSO-E SOS simulation report is available on our website. I put you the link at the bottom of the slide where you can download the report. Thank you all.
So thank you very much, Louis and Arturo. We will now look at the stress test and risk assessment of electricity system, with Alban.
Thank you, Claire. So we have seen that for the gas from this year, they have two reports, so one for winter outlook, one for security of supply. Here in our winter outlook of electricity, we have included some specific stress tests on qualitative analysis as insights. In the future, it might be tackled with a different way. Probably could be linked with the risk preparedness plan package or regulation. That is, I will come to that later. So regarding concretely what is in the present winter outlook for electricity. So as Louis mentioned for the gas disruption, we have the sensitivity update about the risk of disruption from Ukraine route, and we confirmed that the southeast countries might be at risk from some partial gas disruption. But the electricity system is robust against this analysis, and so it's a confirmation on this sensitivity. Regarding the hydro reservoirs, we also have specific insights on that, and we display the evolution of the starting level from the season. And we want to point out that there are some countries with historically low levels, especially in Italy, Spain, and recently in France. In France, it was not as we edited the final report. It came from the very recent weeks, and it's important to consider these three countries belongs to neighboring areas, where not Spain, but at least Italy and France were also mentioned for all the risk of adequacy. We had also other risk assessment on which I will come later. There one is about a qualitative insight on multiple outages, and the other one is main risk perceived by TSOs. So regarding the insight on multiple outages, there was a qualitative example to display what is the possible impact of multiple outage of generations in the base case for Bulgaria in the report. As example, it's to be as a kind of a qualitative input following the cold spell of last January. Also a qualitative input on possible outages of transmission with an example, a typical example in Italy, where the transmission outage can impact the net transfer capacities between countries, so that it can impact at the end of the day the adequacy. And the second main point is the main risk perceived by the TSOs. And for that we did a survey, we performed a survey in this summer to have their feedback on that. And I will invite you for this qualitative views on risk perceptions to go inside the report for more details. For this risk perception by the TSOs, we have asked them for different risks that were natural risks or technical risks, and asking them based on both historical values but also possible identification of risk for the future. What is the frequency of the risk, and what, if the risk occurs, what is the severity of the risk? So the frequency would be one in 10 years, 1 in 5 years, and so on. And the severity would be the impact on the the number of the number of customers that might be disconnected because of a blackout or a big issue based on this risk. So here it's to be assessed as a first qualitative input, as it concerns TSO views based on a survey. It's interesting to have the lessons learned at pan-European level, at least. See that the most frequent natural risks are the strong winds and storms. And you see that also the most severe, so the one impacting the customers are the cold waves and also strong winds. So we are just approaching the winter, so these strong winds and cold waves are possible occurrence and much higher occurrence in the winter. And it was for the natural risk, and for the non-natural risk, the most frequent is the one related to failure on assets. It could be either transmission assets or generation assets. And related to the non-technical, the most critical in terms of severity is the malicious attacks, where there is a real risk that is tackled by the TSOs on ENTSO-E today, and we know that it's something that will could increase a kind of risk in the future. So for the next slide, we go to the next step. So what is coming for the electricity outlooks? So as I mentioned, we are paving the way also to implement the future clean energy package, especially on risk preparedness plan, which is still in discussion, but I will highlight it in the next slide as well, just to show the topics overview. We want also to extend our coordination with the week ahead adequacy that is performed by the regional security coordinators. There was in the meanwhile a question on that. The week ahead adequacy today is starting is a kind of starting prototype and a test. There are not a systematic publication yet on that, but today it's just something starting to be updated. First, I want to start it every week to have, for instance, every Monday morning or Sunday the forecast of risk for next week. But later on, they want to have a rolling update, so every Monday for rolling 7 days, every Tuesday, and so on. So it's something that is on progress, and we bridge it to our seasonal outlook. We share our data, we share our methodology, the common approach. And the last point is related to the bridge to the other side of the horizon, which is the midterm adequacy. And here we want to improve the methodology of seasonal outlooks in the future. By next winter, as a goal to try to assess more probabilistic and hourly modeling, market modeling, which today we do first a deterministic and then probabilistic around 1 hour or several peak hours, and we would like to assess more probabilistic hourly results for all the period of the winter, which is quite challenging, as the time to implement seasonal outlook is only around 2 months, including data collection, data check, preparing, calculating, and preparing reports. So it's a big challenge to have that ready, but we are focusing on that in the next year. So if you go to the next slide, it's just insight on the risk preparedness. So we are already on the way on that. So there are 2 articles that are currently under discussion with the European Parliament, the Council and European Commission. So it's not at all final text here, it's just some bullet points, I would say. So what we will be asked to propose methodology both for identifying crisis scenarios, taking on board natural hazards, accidental hazards like multiple outages, fuel shortage like the link to the gas, and malicious attacks. So we see that in the presentation of the report and in the report of the Winter Outlook, you have the at least some inputs from all these aspects. And regarding the second point is this Article 8 is from Risk Preparedness Draft Regulation. ENTSO-E is asked to propose a methodology for the short-term adequacy, so from seasonal outlook to week ahead, which shall cover different probability of transmission, generation, and planned outages, different weather conditions, viability of demand, crisis situation, on simultaneous crisis situation. You can see that here there is something that is already performed today. What we want to increase is the assessment on the probability approach to increase the hourly probability assessment of the coming seasons. So that was from the Winter Outlook on next steps and on outcomes.
Thank you very much, Alban. So plenty of food for thoughts and data. And now we will leave you 5 minutes to send us a couple of questions. So let's resume at 12 o'clock and we'll go through your questions and try to answer them as much as possible. So I will mute us for 5 minutes now. Hello again. So we're ready to answer your questions. So we had one from Petros. I'm just going to read it out for all the audience. It's about gas. So it's where can someone see the relevant probabilities for each scenario and which model used for probabilities estimation? Louis, are you going to take the question?
Yes, and I think there is another one following on the percentage the probability in terms of loss of load. So to make it more general, actually the disruption scenarios were defined by the gas coordination group and they cover all the main gas supply corridors. There is absolutely no probability attached to it. We only presented the Ukrainian disruption to you during this webinar because first it was in our previous winter outlooks, and second we thought you might be interested in this scenario as ENTSO-E is actually running a sensitivity analysis on it. So I hope this will answer your question. The 17 scenarios were defined to cover all the gas supply corridors and there is no probability attached to them.
Okay. Thank you very much, Louis. We, of course, I mean, our experts can always come back to you if you have any additional points or comments, maybe by email later after this webinar. So on the electricity side, we've got lots of questions. We'll start with the one from Andreas. In case you have any insights about the use of the network reserve in Germany in the winter, last winter, so 16-17, and its use for redispatch this winter. Okay, this would be great. Do you have any insights, Alban?
Okay, thank you, Andreas. So actually, we have in the published dataset with the report, we have the input of these assumptions by the all German TSOs regarding the network reserves, but we don't have further element on your question related to the past winter on that we could investigate and come to you at a separate moment. I take the opportunity to answer another question related to 4 German TSOs. So it's right, there are 4 German TSOs, and there are 1 coordinator among them, and we have only 1 data set for Germany. So there is coordination at country level.
Thank you very much. So moving on to the second question is Petros again. Which model is used for probability analysis?
So we have today the same tool, which is a simple tool using homemade tool using linear optimization. But we use the same for the deterministic approach on the probabilistic, which is something running many deterministic at many hours. What we want in the future is to have a commercial tools or a tool that have been proven, like it is used by the midterm adequacy forecast that can go further in different levels of accuracy. Also, it replies to some questions about the tool related to the market. There are quite many questions, but the situation is that the tool cannot assess any market price or whatever. Also, it's not the purpose of the adequacy for that. We just have a simplified simplified merit order. Yeah, there is no markets-based demand-side response as well.
So Petros is asking, can someone see the forecasts per industry and per country?
The forecast is visible per country in the data set I mentioned, so which is published. There is no differentiation by type or by industry.
Thank you. Another one from Hendrik. I have a question related to slide 7. What is included in the category other thermal, apart from waste incineration plants?
Okay, apart from waste incineration, in other is mainly oil. Oil could be oil shale, mixed fuels, on other non-renewable sources.
Thank you. From Petros, Greece in the matrix is green, but in the map it is dark blue.
Okay, so it was just about one slide where we have to go to the report for that. It's true that the maps are represented with blue when at least when 1 week is needed, there is a need to import, where the granularity of the table is a weekly approach, and so it could be 1 week importing and 1 week exporting. That's why you have 1 week blue, 1 week green. But in the average map, we have only the overview of the worst case.
So from Marta, are the weekly adequacy assessments done by the RSCs publicly available?
So to this one I already replied. It's a very starting phase on the test, so not at this time, and its implementation until end of next year.
And she was also asking about, we can go back to her question about how do you consider the forced outages in your assessment as a reduction of the available capacity equal to the FOR? If so, this is also a very pessimistic consideration.
Yeah, that's indeed true. Today we have a conservative approach on voluntary basis as we want to show a stress test. We had a simplified approach, mainly taking the percentage of outage risk and multiplied by the amount of net generating capacity of this kind of generation.
Okay, going back to Petros again, from my understanding, the percentage of the maps describe the demand curtailment. If yes, then how can someone find a relevant probability in terms, let's say, of loss of load? And I don't know what the P is. Probability, sorry.
Sorry, I think this one was more related to the
that's the one you answered, Louis.
Yeah,
okay, perfect. All right, thank you very much. So we'll take a couple of last questions, then we'll have to leave the people as we are running out of time. So Andreas, will ENTSO-E do any analysis related to midterm adequacy with a view to increase politically driven coal phase out?
So the midterm adequacy is a different report that is published also every year, and we have our publication of midterm adequacy is available. It's recently published the 1st of October. On 2nd of October you can have it under, you go to ENTSO-E website and then Outlooks, and then you have the midterm adequacy. You will see different insights, and it's true that the coal is something that needs to be further addressed as a sensitivity in the future.
Okay, so I think we'll just have the last one from Bram. What are the assumptions on the availability of French nuclear generation coming this winter?
So these assumptions are those related to the beginning of October. We know that there is always possible change in the different maintenance that are planned, and for that it's linked to other questions on this topic as well. We have, even if it's a test, this week ahead adequacy on these regional security coordinators, we are coordinating with them. We are sharing our input with them, and in case of big change in the assumptions like delay of end of maintenance of nuclear units, we would rerun specific, at least at the regional coordination levels, specific run to see the situation. But there will not be an update of the winter outlook as itself.
Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. If there are more questions that we weren't able to take here during the webinar, my colleagues will look at them and answer them by email. So we're just gonna go to the concluding slides. We wanted you to just take some takeaways that our seasonal outlooks are unique in the sense that they are pan-European, they're system-wide, and the methodologies are continuously improving, and cooperation between the TSOs and between gas and electricity is always increasing. Adequacy that is studied in our outlooks are for electricity adequacy under exceptionally severe conditions, and for gas under extreme cold events or in case of supply route disruptions. And the scope of risk considered increases in those sector studies, so as to cover as more potential risks. Just 2 slides on ENTSO-E related activities. I just wanted to say that if you are interested in the issues of the security of supplies during winter, we produced a managing critical grid situations report that is looking at the cold spell last year with a detailed analysis on the technical side of things, but also on market. And there is an addendum to this study focusing really on the market aspects that is going to come out soon on this episode in 2017 January. And then for those who haven't registered yet, we just wanted to flag out that there are still a couple of places left for our annual conference in Brussels on the 5th and 6th of December. So I wanted to thank you for all your attention, for your good questions, and I wanted to flag out that the slides and a recording of the webinar will be available on ENTSO-E and ENTSO-E's websites today or tomorrow. Thank you very much. See you next year.